Dr. Kingsley Makhubela, I want to say welcome to actually our very, very first ever Blindspot special. It is an awesome moment to welcome you as a very accomplished human being, I will put it. And for our audience out there, Dr. Makhubela, you started your career in a very interesting way. We will talk about that in a few moments. Today you are here to share with us your experience of engaging with Somalia. We will talk about your PhD. We will talk about your views on state failure and conflict mediation. So viewers, we have an exciting interview. Welcome. And Dr. Makhubela, a first question I want to start off with, really just to break the ice. Tell us something about where you grew up and what led you to become Oliver Reginald Tambo's right-hand man in exile. Fascinating. Please share that story with us.
Dr. P, thank you very much, and it's wonderful to reconnect with you.
Yes.
I think last time we were having totally different discussions, but
unfortunately, but now much better so.
Also looking at the country, looking at the benefit of the country. To cut the long story short, like any other young South African growing up in the late 70s, one joined the liberation struggle first. I joined the underground struggle in the country at a very early age of 17 and went into exile.
Mm-hmm. 17?
Yeah.
Sure.
And in exile, I was instructed amongst a group of us who were involved in the underground struggle to leave the country because at that stage the security branch were hot on our heels and they wanted to arrest us, and there were all sorts of allegations they were making about us, that we were armed and dangerous, we had weapons, which we didn't. I belonged to the political structures within the country. So I was never in the military structure in the country until I left the country, and I underwent military training in different areas, in the GDR, in Angola, and so on.
Sure.
And then after that, that's when I got trained as a counterintelligence officer, actually. And I ended up working and looking after OR. And eventually I became the head of the OR security unit. Sure. I only learned later, Dr. P, that there was a vetting process and a selection process for people to work with OR. I learned later when I was involved now in the selection that we were running a very rigorous process of vetting people who work with OR. Because working with OR was exposing all of us, the unit, to the most secretive part and the most dangerous work within the ANC.
The nerve center, if you think of it, that's the nerve center of ANC in exile.
I mean, we organized meeting of the top leadership, and I actually get goosebumps now when I think about the dangers we were having and the responsibility that was put on me, on my shoulders at the tender age of 24 years.
Sure. Amazing.
So when you sit down and reflect on that now,
you wonder how.
And what if OR was assassinated? What if he was captured whilst I was looking after him? And I think South Africans wouldn't have forgiven me.
You know, something that comes to mind now, interesting, as you're telling that story, that of course is also your step into international relations. Not just going into exile, but think of this. O.R. Tambo, he is the focal point of the ANC, but of course O.R. Tambo is the international face of the ANC. So by implication, your career as a diplomat, in a way, starts way before you ever become South African ambassador, for example.
No, we traveled the world with OR. I remember we had a meeting with Dietrich Genscher, was the foreign minister of Germany. OR had a meeting with him to discuss the question of the COVID, the military submarines that were going to be sold to apartheid South Africa. We had discussions with the Prime Minister of Italy, with discussions with a lot of prominent people around the world, anti-apartheid movement, underground structures of the ANC even in those areas. So there's been a lot of expose, if you want to say so, around international work and diplomatic work of the ANC. Remember, at the same time, the ANC had a lot of offices around the world. I mean, When Dulcie September was assassinated, we've just had a visit to Paris
That
a
was
week earlier.
1986.
1986.
Yeah.
We just had a visit a week earlier in France, and later on she was assassinated. So remember, she was assassinated just immediately after the celebration of the bicentenary of the French Revolution.
That's it.
And Noir was invited to go and participate at the French Revolution bicentenary. So one has had this kind of unique exposure that later on came handy when I became a former diplomat.
Of course.
in
And Chief
the
of State
South
Protocol. Fascinating. He was, Dr. Makhubela was not just an ambassador, but he was also Chief of State Protocol in the Mandela administration, I believe,
Absolutely.
in the 90s. Now that, of course, that's the first democratic administration. Chief of State Protocol, I think, oftentimes we hear these titles thrown around in the media or in the press, but your role as State Protocol Chief...
You know, before that, Dr. P, there was some form of a serious induction when I look at it later on. When I was sent in 1991, after I came back from exile, and I was sent to the UN as the deputy representative of the ANC mission to the UN. This was during the CODESA negotiation in the country.
Oh, okay.
And our function in the UN was basically to inform, there was a permanent observer mission of the ANC to the United Nations that operates within the anti-apartheid movement. There was a center for anti-apartheid within the UN system. And our responsibility was to inform the UN around developments in the country. Remember, there was a consensus resolution on apartheid and its consequences, which was a UN document that really imposed conditions for negotiation in the country and for normalization of the situation in the country. So our function was to inform the UN, and of course there was a permanent mission of South Africa to the UN. So we performed along the permanent mission of apartheid South Africa at that stage to inform the UN about developments in the country. So one got inducted into the situation. And ironically, my first vote for a democratic South Africa was at the United Nations in 1994.
Oh, well.
And after 1994, I then came back to join the Department of Foreign Affairs, and I was the head of protocol for President Mandela. And I've had a lot of a privilege to serve very distinguished people and senior leaders in government, and to see the manner in which Mandela functioned, and the level of influence he had around the world, and the trust that still was placed on me. I remember we had a very dicey situation at one stage in the country. Parliament was going to vote on the national anthem. And then President Mandela was undertaking a state visit to Botswana at the same time. You will recall at that time there were concerns in Botswana that Mandela has not paid a state visit to Botswana. And Botswana were worried because it was starting to create the wrong impression, because they were very supportive and they suffered from apartheid.
Of course, they real frontline state.
And President Mandela was torn between the two, carrying on the debate in Parliament around the adoption of the national anthem. And in President Mandela's view, there were people within his own party who were of the view that the stem should not be part of that. And President Mandela felt that we needed to cancel a state visit the day before. I was in Botswana. And we had gone to the home state of Sesere Tsagama. The traditional leaders had made huge preparations for President Mandela, and the respect for traditional leaders that Mandela had. And Mandela wanted to cancel the state visit. I had to get on the phone and speak to President Mandela to say we can't cancel it at this late hour, because if we were to do that, the damage would be immense for the country. It took time to convince President Mandela, and I needed to provide some suggestion to the President, and I suggested to the President to postpone the debate, speak to the Speaker, who was Frene Ginwala, postpone the debate on the national anthem adoption, but undertake the state visit because the damage was immense. It was going to create irreparable damage. So those were interesting moments that one had an interaction, and to look at the leader of Nelson Mandela. I mean, I was a director at that time, but the President would listen to the advice that I was giving to him
Yeah.
and the then foreign minister,
Yeah.
the late Alfred Nzo, around how do we manage this. But it was an introduction to. It's always important to be able to give an independent opinion to leaders. And in my own observation in government, across the board, I must say,
Sure.
I've realized that if I stand up and provide my advice to the president, I've done the same with President Beki, provided advice on Somalia, things we shouldn't do, things we should do. And I found that the leaders are very acceptable to this kind of independent thinking. And that's how a policy practitioner should function. Don't second guess what the principal wants to hear, but tell them what they don't want to hear and show them
And why?
the repercussion
Yes.
of not doing certain things or of doing certain things, and let them make an independent decision after they have had the opportunity to look at both sides of the story. And that's what I found very interesting as a public servant during that time. And the question is that as we evolve and build the capacity of the public service, are we having people who can stand up to our political leaders and say to them, this you can't do, this you can't do? Those are issues that we need to interact and build that institutional capacity.